Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that provides you an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world and ask how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's August 4th, 2025. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue, how have you been?
My default answer is always excellent or great. I can't believe it's the beginning of August. This past week, I don't have much interesting banter because it was just a week where chemotherapy just had its way with me. For people going through chemo, I have a suggestion. Arnold Palmer's lemonade and iced tea are a good drink because there's enough acidity to cut through the metallic taste of chemo. There you have it.
Love a good Arnie
Anyway,
Palmy.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, what have you been up to? How are the boys?
They're good. So our oldest is about to start kindergarten next week,
Craziness.
which is like a whole life shock thing anyway. But we went school supply shopping, or he and his mom went school supply shopping over the weekend, and they brought back all the things he needed, but pink pearl magic erasers. There's not a whole lot that gives you more nostalgia for back to school than that smell of the old pink pearl. And I was wondering if that resonated the same for you, or if there's another smell or back to school memory that you have that has a similar transportation.
Well, number one, I loved back to school shopping. I loved getting organized. I liked new pencils, new crayons, new ruler, new compass. That's what we did when we were young because
New
I don't
slide
know.
rule when you got
I
older.
was just settle down. Settle down on the slide rule. But yes, I can read a slipstick to 7 digits. I think it was just the whole thing. I also think it was going with my mom,
Yeah.
right? And it was kind of a rite of passage. And I can't imagine how excited he is to have all that, tools to be a big boy and to go to school. So crazy. How fun. But yeah, I loved it. We also, when I was little, we had that kind of putty eraser,
Uh-huh.
that you could pull apart and it was really stringy. And then my mom banned it because I couldn't be trusted with it. So that's one of my memories too. I don't want to hear it, Susan. It was a lot of what I heard growing up.
Well, I had another question for you, and I think I'm going to place the over-under at 3. How many times in your career you walked into a random room, perhaps hidden or otherwise, and you found burn bags, unburned or uncrushed shredded? And the background on this is last week sometime, Kash Patel, the FBI director, said he discovered a hidden room with burn bags in it filled with evidence from the Russia hoax investigation of 2016.
You mean there were documents that were waiting to be disposed of properly in a burn bag that is marked for disposal? Gosh, that's horrifying. No, 3?
Yeah, I'm putting the over-under on 3.
Every single day of my life.
One for a decade.
No, every single day of my life, at least once a day, because that was the approved storage.
Huh.
And, now I will say, I don't know at the FBI whether every room is secure. And so where I
Sure.
generally worked, we worked in vaults. And so we had open storage. Yes, but definitely over 3, you win. But you could have said over 3,000 and you could have still won.
I would have taken the under actually, but I guess I was thinking about how long, if they would have been there from, what is that, almost 10 years ago? That is less believable to me. But open storage and stuff waiting to be disposed of, yeah, I buy that all the time.
Yeah, but maybe it requires somebody to decide to take the burn bag to the incinerator, right? To actually burn the bag. And so imagine that they're part of the Durham investigation. The Durham investigation ends as it comes to a close. Everyone's going. I don't think Durham himself was going to police the area and clean up the rooms.
Yeah.
I just think this is just kind of making something that is a necessary thing that you have to do for secure storage, that it was in a room that was not exposed to the public. I'm not sure what we're super worried about. But, everything is everything. But no, you would have won with a much higher number. Even though, I must say, it felt like for the most of my career, I was the most junior person. And so I was the one that was always taking burn bags to the incinerator. And then as I got more senior, I remembered that it was a pain in the butt to be the most junior person, so I took mine to the incinerator anyway. It's bad tradecraft, bad housekeeping. You should always get rid of them, but I think to find something nefarious about that is pretty unlikely.
About the op-ed that Brennan and Clapper just put out. Any thoughts on that before we get started?
If you've listened to our podcast and you read their op-ed, it says about the same thing and makes the same 3 points. In order to find something wrong, you have to fundamentally misunderstand what the Senate report said and the difference between the intelligence community assessment of Russian interference in any counterintelligence effort that goes forward. I will say, I was thinking the other day, is why are people so willing to believe that there's a cabal of civil servants? Now, remember, these are civil servants. So, Eric, when I joined the CIA as a GS7 in 1980, my biweekly take-home pay was $197, and I made $13,000 a year. So, this idea that you have career civil servants, plotting to do something that is counter to the craft that they have joined up and served for a long time, I don't think makes much sense. But we haven't been very successful at convincing the American people that that's unlikely to be true. So I'm going to try a different tack. Ready? We don't actually care that much about who the president is. And so I may have been a Trump appointee when I changed from being a civil servant to a political appointee for Donald Trump. I served under Reagan and Clinton and Bush and Obama and Bush. I served 7 presidents, right? You just do your job for the president, name independence. So this idea, which is so hubrisy, that the whole federal establishment cares that much about Donald Trump does not comport with my experience, nor does it comport with the people who devote their life to serving the American people. So that's my attempt for today. We just don't care. And I'll tell a story. My dad was in the Navy, and he used to tell a story about change of command ceremonies where the officers are all up on the dais on a really hot tarmac, and all the sailors are standing in the heat, dripping wet, just listening to these people drone on and give their speeches. And he tells a story about 2 sailors in the back row. One leans to the others and says, "These officers, they come and go. They don't hurt the outfit much." And there's a lot of truth in that, right? The strength of our government is in part that we can withstand changes in administration. And part of the reason you withstand changes in administration is because all you're focused on is affecting their policies in a mindful way, not having an opinion about what their policies are. So maybe we'll slowly drip, drip, drip and make a change with the American people, huh?
I hope so. Let's get to some headlines. This week in the threat picture, China's commercial space industry is booming, and if the U.S. doesn't figure out how to regulate, partner, or compete fast, we may just hand them low Earth orbit on a silver platter. A Microsoft escort program exposed U.S. defense systems to Chinese engineers, raising alarms about just how far brand loyalty has outpaced national security vetting. And the Trump administration's firings at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and West Point send a chilling message. If you or your data doesn't match the political narrative, your job might be next.
What a good set. All right, let's get at it.
Before we get into this week's stories, it's time for a geopolitical gut check. So this is going to be a new segment that we're going to call a romp around the world. This is where we zoom out. We'll look at what's happening across the globe and why it matters to us here at home. Sue, why don't you take a few minutes, take us around the world? What are you seeing? Where should we be paying the most attention right now?
Yeah, I love this. I love romping. First, let me recommend to our listeners, Eric, there's a woman named Beth Sanner, and she has a new website called bethsanner.com, BETHSANNER.com. She was career intelligence analyst, one of the smartest people I know, but she ended her career, her last job before retirement was as President Trump's intelligence briefer. She is really incredibly thoughtful on this topic. So if you wanna just do some work on your own and kinda get a feel for what the experts are thinking, Beth usually has a pretty good take on it. So I'll try and do my version of it, but if you wanna dive into it, I really encourage you to because it what is happening geopolitically does actually matter to us. So we'll start with Russia, Ukraine. I actually think that we may be trending in a decent direction, not necessarily in terms of outcome, but there are some actions of the Trump administration that I think at this time hack and some good things. Number one is freeing up aid to Ukraine. Two, let's not be negative about everything that happens. I think you have to look at what's happening in Europe and NATO and see that what has happened is for myriad reasons, they have kind of rallied to the moment in terms of recognizing the role they have in their backyard and devoting more of their resources to good outcome. I think that what you're seeing, and just on a straight economic front, is the idea of Europe and NATO and other allies and partners spending money with the US to actually acquire weapons and security systems that will help provide an overlay is a really good trend for us, especially as we're trying to rebuild our coffers. Having the resources and the approach to affect what seems to be a revolution in military affairs going on in terms of how warfare is changing. So you have to look at all those things and say, we might be okay. I worry a little bit that we haven't seen Russia's or Putin's push back on this. The yeah, the 12 to 15 days for sanctions, it just worries me a bit. And I think in the history repeating itself category, he has proven when he's forced to choose in any tangible way, President Trump tends to ameliorate, you know, kind of the Putin piece at the expense of the free and open societies. The reason this is really important, I cannot stress enough that this is in part a kind of battle for um, the soul of free and open societies in a new world order. You just can't have someone decide that they're going to come in and take a piece of land, abuse civilian populations, and let that go unchecked. And not just because you can't intellectually, but there are a lot of people that don't have the resources that we do or that are watching about whose side they're going to have to choose. So this is an important kind of battle for the nature of the world order that we're going to have going forward. So worth watching. So that's Ukraine and Russia. Anything I missed?
Almost thought you were talking about Gaza there,
Okay. So let's move on. Israel,
except for the
Gaza.
whole annexation piece.
Yeah.
Few parallels there.
Yeah. Uh, I'm going to actually make a different parallel with Israel, Gaza, and make it with the early days of us fighting the war on terror. So kind of as is my want, let's bounce up and just say that post October 7th, it is hard not to say that Israel had the right to defend itself and rid itself of this horrible thing. And we'll put aside that they should have been prepared and they have no strategy, it seems, going forward. But now we're here where we are. They have responsibility for that land. I'm going to stop short of calling it genocide, but what they're allowing to happen is their responsibility. There's just no one else to do it. I suppose you could expect Hamas to capitulate, surrender, and turn and all the things, but again, now you're expecting somebody else who doesn't have the value prop that we ostensibly have, expecting them to behave entirely differently. So this is a big rub, and the United States is a bit in the crosshairs on this one because you're just feeling the tide turning in America about, come on, who are we? Right? Who are we? Like, I can have a lot of conversations about what is Israel doing, what's their strategy going forward. Is not Netanyahu basically doing anything he can, weirdly, a little bit like President Trump, to avoid scrutiny on a topic he doesn't want by creating something he has? And I guess I'm glad that the United States is providing some humanitarian relief. I think this is important. My parallel is with the war on terror. So when we first started the war on terror, we would do whack-a-mole, right? There would be some terrorist event. We would go screaming into Iraq or to Syria or to somebody else. We would crush ISIS and then we would leave. And we left destruction behind us. We left decimated populations that became refilled with the same people we tried to extract. And they would come in and we would do it again. We created more destruction. Over time, we changed our strategy to come in, get rid of the terrorist threat, and then hold the land until some sense of normalcy could be reestablished. People could come back into it. There's some sort of society that was organic, and then move on to the next thing. So I think if I'm giving advice to Israel, I'm going to say that you're executing a strategy, if you have one, that is unlikely to work. I do think the United States is going to have to figure out where we stand. This is a really big issue generationally in America. Weirdly, it plays out in terms of what's happening on college campuses. And so, at some point, the U.S. has got to realize that it is using taxpayer-funded dollars to support someone who may or may not be executing against our values. I don't think you can minimize how important the Middle East is when it is relatively stable, and there have been times when it's relatively stable. When you have bad actors and no ability to communicate, it just tends to go badly. If I look back on the first Trump administration, I think I would probably say that they did a decent job of their Middle East policy, including the Abraham Accords that got us out of the region, which is always an irritant, and forced the region to do more work itself, which I think played dividends on October 7th. But it does matter to us. It matters to us in terms of trade and resources. So that's Gaza and Israel. And let's talk about one that is always kind of top of mind for me, and that's Taiwan, China. The reason we talk about these things is at some point it will become a conversation about whether responding to some crisis is in America's interest. I commend to you not just because I was a part of it, but actually because I did it with Admiral Mike Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Council of Foreign Relations report called U.S. China Taiwan in a Time of Rising Tensions that talks about exactly what's going on there. We aren't talking about it much, but Xi has made it very clear that he intends to reintegrate Taiwan, either peaceably or forcefully, into one entity. Taiwan is a free and open society. They are one of the great democracies. They're one of the great free trade enterprises. They're hugely important internationally. They're important to us in terms of chip manufacturing. And like Ukraine, you just can't be having democracies being picked off by people that want it. What makes this challenging is the U.S. policy toward China Taiwan is still stated as a one-China policy of strategic ambiguity. And that is, we don't like it, but we're not going to insert ourselves into it. But let's be clear about China is doing the boiling frog of more and more demonstrations that cross over into coercion in terms of the military exercises they're having in the Taiwan Strait, their actions in the South China Sea, demonstrating their intention, all of which we've talked about for a long time. I think the reason why I want to bounce it up to the top is, man, it is a big problem if it turns violent. And if we decide to engage, there are estimates of trillions of dollars of economic impact on the global economy. And if you think about the pandemic, when we couldn't get ships for rockets, this is going to be a world where you can't get a, a washing machine. And so it is an interest not just in Sue world of got to maintain the free and open societies, but real tangible benefit. And the reason I'm bouncing it up to you is Xi is under incredible pressure in China. His economy isn't going well. He hasn't been seen as much in public as he used to be. There's some suggestion that he has rivals exerting their will. And one of the things that we have always cited is that when he feels pressure, and again, kind of like Putin, kind of like President Trump, kind of like Netanyahu, when he feels pressure, he's going to look to an action that's going to relieve some of that pressure. And so there is a school of thought that says, as pressure on him ramps up, the likelihood that he will choose that moment to inspire nationalism in China to take some action against Taiwan could happen. So just worth putting on your radar because the effects of what happens there are so profound economically, not just militarily.
I think that's really interesting with Xi, especially if he feels backed into a corner, right? Because any crisis domestically gets overshadowed by a national event, right? If you ask me before, would we go to Taiwan's aid because they're our ally, I'd point to our withdrawal in Afghanistan and our limited support to Ukraine as, hey, maybe we're not the ally and consistent partner that we used to be or we claim to be. But TSMC, I think, is a much bigger variable. Taiwan Semiconductor. They make the majority of the chips. So I think that creates another wrinkle and element of our interest there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know the way this shakes out. When we talk later about kind of what's happening with the professional cadre, these are big issues that have to be worked on. China is so not anybody else. We are so intertwined economically with them. And we'll talk about this in actually kind of both sections that we have going forward. So Taiwan is a different kind of issue that takes different kinds of thoughtfulness to address.
Briefly before we move on, I just want to say that I 1,000% think Israel should have gone after Hamas and those assholes. But at
Yeah.
this point, they're kind of being the assholes and need to treat those people with more respect. If you think that Hamas is just going to turn over or start negotiating, all they want is death and destruction. That's terrorism, right? You need to go back into Palestine and win some hearts and minds, right, with the
Yeah.
population, because those are still your citizens.
Yeah, you and I see it exactly the same way. And you have a responsibility. It might even be Geneva Convention-y, right? If you're controlling the land, you have the responsibility for the people on the land. And I totally agree on their original righteousness in their response. But this is a different moment. And don't Hamas isn't going to be different than Hamas is.
Terrorists go down to the last man, right? They just want to strike fear and death and destruction. So put two in their heart, put one in their mind, and then rebuild.
The quotable Eric Kep. I love it.
So our first headline, we're going to talk about commercial space. China's state-backed surge into commercial space is accelerating, fueled by policy support and private innovation, challenging U.S. dominance as thousands of low Earth orbit satellites come online. While U.S. firms like SpaceX lead in launch volume, proposed regulatory rollbacks and a shift from safety to commerce raises big concerns about how and whether the U.S. will manage this orbital surge responsibly. With projections showing low Earth orbit LEO satellites growing from about 7,400 in 2023 to over 42,000, so almost 6x by 2032, and China pushing beyond domestic needs to target global markets, the balance between speed, safety, and strategy has never been more critical. This quote, fail fast, learn faster mentality has been at the core of American space industry. But what are your thoughts on the new-ish space race and how the U.S. competes with Chinese commercial space companies that are inherently dual use? We've talked about this before with the Chinese government, the nature of the Chinese government and their national control of their institutions, Sue.
Man, so many rich sub-threads on this one. What's happening in commercial technology writ large? Technology that is developed outside of governmental control, but with security, impact, and value is really quite amazing and challenging from a governance perspective. We'll probably need to spend more time on US commercial space in general and what I think it can afford in terms of supporting human activity, whether that is security or whether that is just human activity on Earth, to include what we talked about with Kerrville and other things. But what's going on in commercial space technology is absolutely eye-watering. In a weird parallel with AI, it's being governed disproportionately by market forces right now. And so, well, actually, it's kind of dually being controlled by market forces and over government regulations. So we'll kind of hit both those. The the market forces is it's just moving so fast, developing capabilities, people launching things as fast as they can. It is a bit of an arcane subject, but there are lots and lots and lots of incidents of either collisions or near avoidance. So responsible use of space is super important. The big companies, SpaceX is one what Eutelsat, OneWeb. There are a lot of people that are very much about the responsible use of space and already do sharing of data to try and minimize the impact. I think one of the things you're gonna have to do is you're almost going to have to create a working capital fund, where if you wanna throw something up there, you have to put some set of money into the hopper in order to be able to manage deconflictions, and tracking and debris removal and all those sorts of things. It's super exciting. It's not gonna get less. Man, there is a total advantage to being high up and looking down and being able to see more area. What's happening with sensors in order to be able to detect activity predictively, what LEO is great for in terms of revisit and being able to see the same place over and over and over again, whether that is using that for national security or using that for disaster response. I think there's just so much benefit. But if we don't find some way in order to be responsible about it, it's like the conundrum is the more dependent we get on it, the more impact there will be of some tragic outcome. So that's just one element of the commercial use. I think you've probably got a couple others that you've mentioned to me before. One is China's dual use, and the other is how do you regulate it? To the point about China, because that's where we started this piece and what China's doing. Man, China's going great guns, and I think there are lessons to be had here about they are sometimes late to the party, AI, but when they go, they have a very different approach of whole of country, whole of government, a whole of industry response, and when they decide to move, they move, and they can undercut. And so you can imagine a circumstance where the US decides that it wants to overregulate its commercial space industry for myriad reasons. We want to make sure that we're not giving away any secrets or giving away any technology. They're underregulating it, and people are looking at the benefits of commercial low Earth orbit state, and the market actually moves to China, even though we have a significant lead in terms of capabilities now. So there are lots of dimensions to this one.
I think later this year, 50% of their capability is gonna be in communications with their satellites, so that's like the think Starlink from SpaceX type deal where they're allowing communications in remote areas, and that's part of their Belt and Road and Silk Road initiatives to get the soft power piece that we talked about last time, and then they're also producing significantly more and launching more image analysis satellites than they have a domestic need for. So they're going to be looking to the international market. One thing I wanted to follow up on with you though was you mentioned that possibility of like a holding fund or something in terms of providing deconfliction and funding that. Would that come from like a launch tax or something, or would that be pooled resources among the companies, or how do you think that would get implemented?
I like a launch tax, just because if you're throwing it up there, you ought to be responsible for it, right? It feels pretty easy now who gets it, and how it gets allocated and who's controlling it and how do you make sure you have your fair share. I think, we've solved those problems so many times before. To your point about China and its market, just kind of bouncing back to that and to our conversation about a romp around the world. What I think the last 5 years, especially in the Ukraine crisis, has demonstrated to everyone is I need sovereign intelligence, right? I need intelligence capabilities. It is available commercially. And when it's available commercially, I don't have to worry whether the US is going to be a good partner or not. I can just buy the capability. But remember, just like in broadband communications, China can discount their services massively. And so now you have people who want the capability, they can get it at a 40% discount. So I think thinking about the moment where, again, we want forces of good and free and open societies to dominate, we have an opportunity with our commercial markets to serve not only our needs, but international needs. We do need to be more responsible, but if we don't step into the moment, China's got every ability to step into it, just like their GPS equivalent, Baidu. If you want to get on and you're not in the United States or you're being denied it at all, you can use theirs. So it, it even though it's commercial, it is a potential impact on national and global security if we don't manage this moment well.
And we're currently ahead. And I think they
Certainly.
started really taking a look at this capability back in like 2014. And we have some really good companies that offer these services, but if we don't support them, then they're going to fall behind. The backdrop of all of this is a potential executive order that would dramatically reshape how we manage space launches, which you talked about some of the deconfliction already. It proposes shifting mission authority from the Department of Transportation, which is traditionally focused on safety, to the Department of Commerce, which would prioritize industry growth. The executive order also aims to streamline regulation, targeting the FAA's Part 450 rules, which ballooned into a 53-page document despite initial promises of simplicity. So those rules are basically governing launch in terms of launch safety. The FAA does report that they complete about 98% of the reviews within the 180-day window, but critics of this are saying that statistic ignores pre-review negotiations and structural delays. But finally, the EO would dismantle the Office of Space Commerce Traffic Coordination System for space, which is, I think, what you were talking about with the deconfliction, raising fears of orbital chaos just as satellite congestion explodes. The Pentagon maintains its own tracking system. They have something called Space Track, but both defense and industry leaders warn that placing traffic management under DoD risks conflating public safety with military priorities. So the administration wants to get rid of the track CSS, this orbital space deconfliction system, because of project overruns. It's not completed yet. And they believe that private companies, quote, have the capability and the business model to do space traffic coordination on their own. That's initially where my mind went. Let market forces figure it out. If someone has an interest in their satellites not getting run into and create a deconfliction system, then that's probably going to be better and ultimately cost us taxpayers less money. So what are kind of your thoughts on this executive order and those roughly three buckets that it would apply to?
You might have to remind me of all the buckets.
Yeah. We'll start at the top of mission authority, going DOT
Yep.
to commerce.
Okay, so we have a little bit of a problem anyway, is that space used to be the purview of the DoD. There's a huge infrastructure, there's a trained workforce, there's expertise, there's expectation. The problem is that the DoD is all about secure systems, and if the DoD were to keep control of it, and I think they recognize this, you would miss the commerce opportunity, right? Because it's hard to change stripes. The problem is transportation and commerce are woefully under expertised and under history in terms of being able to take on a problem this big. In other words, I just told you that the DoD wasn't the right place. I also told you that with all the investment the DoD has made, they're not sufficient either. I probably like it in transportation more, but transportation or commerce, either one could do it, but you got to invest. And so then that takes you to your second bucket, who's paying for it? You described it really well, but I put one caveat on it. It's super expensive because we built bespoke systems as we always have for national security and their derivative of national security. There are commercial capabilities that could be super well used for some of these things. There are companies that are in the space tracking, space management, I have no association with either of these companies, but Leostella and Privateer are just two of them that are in this business. So there are solutions available if the US government would actually talk to the commercial sector about real requirements that I think could overcome some of the prohibitive costs that we see in straight up government led programs and get us faster there. I harken back to the Kerrville conversation we have is, man, we just are not well positioned for localities, whether that's a company or whether that's state and local, to be able to create something bigger than themselves in a world where the solutions require more global coverage. For me, yes, I think the technologies are available outside the government, but this is one of my mantras is there are some problems that are just big enough that this is what you need a federal government to do. But for goodness sake, let's start doing it in a modern way. And just total aggression, I was looking at I don't know, the finding that just came out about Doge actually costing us $21 billion. I think that is what maddened me the most about the Doge effort is not that the idea wasn't good to look at things that could be done way better than we currently do them, especially in a world where the line has blurred between government and private sector in terms of capability that's available. But you have to do it sensibly, and that's should be something that the government is expected to do. So that was two. What was the third one? The third bucket?
Is there even a need for the track CSS with space track and the DoD system, which I think you kind of answered with both those other two.
Yeah. I don't think we're coming back from the use of space. Let's talk at a later time about what happens when every asset on orbit is both commercial, civilian, and security. And how do you manage that? And fresh off cyber that we're not very good at protecting ourselves against, now we're going to have a space policy that protects us against the same sort of blurred lines between those things. So I think maybe we ought to come back later and talk about how you secure space when some of the assets that you depend on societally are not controlled by the government.
Yeah. 42,000 doesn't seem like that much, but it's the big sky, little airplane idea, right? I don't
Yeah,
think we're necessarily going to get to the scene from Wall-E where the whole horizon is covered in satellites, but there's a deconfliction. And to your point about the government being involved, I don't know how much a commercial company is going to have the negotiating power internationally. It almost seems like an international issue, right? We're talking about China here, but there's many other countries that are putting satellites up and directing their own communications. And is a commercial company going to have the negotiating power if their system's good enough and they can entice everyone to use their platform internationally? But I'm not so sure that they're going to have that negotiating power.
yeah, I don't know that they're going to have the negotiating power. I do think that, China is just so aggressive in these areas where they deem that it is competitive advantage. And we've talked about this before. Russia's aim is to undermine democracy, particularly that which is practiced by the West. And China's aim is to win the global competition so that their system is the one that dominates. And then those are very different imperatives, but this is a battle space for them. And all you need to do is look at 15 years ago. You what, maybe five, even national security assets China was putting on orbit. So you know, pretty interesting. I think we have a lot of places that we can go with this topic going forward. I will say that at some point, our companies are going to have to seriously embrace the fact that they are national security decision makers. Right. Not all of them, not expected to carry all the weight of national security, but in the choices they make, they are making choices for our security. So we'll come back around to that.
Tax is an interesting idea to explore some other time too. Good way to fund some of that stuff.
Yeah.
All right, we're staying on the China topic, and now we're going to discuss China cyber hacking. So, new investigation has
Yay! Talking
revealed that
cyber.
Microsoft relied on China-based engineers to instruct U.S. digital escorts working on Department of Defense systems, an arrangement that may have exposed sensitive national security data to exploitation by Chinese-affiliated hackers. This setup undermines the core of the U.S. government's zero trust cybersecurity model. So, what is zero trust? Basically means never trust and always verify. Defined by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is a U.S. federal agency that operates under the Department of Commerce. It's an evolving set of cybersecurity paradigms that eliminates implicit trust in any user. And it's got a few basic principles, such as no implicit trust, meaning all entities are considered untrusted until you verify them. There's least privileged access, so grant only the minimal access required for each request. And then contextual risk-based access decisions, evaluate identified device posture, location, behavior, etc. And so I think this third principle kind of resonates most with this article. Digital escorts are not a AI prostitution thing, but instead somebody that's working with foreign engineers and software developers on a DoD project. Many people from the ProPublica article we read, Sue, didn't even know that this system was in place by Microsoft in the DoD, which is a little concerning. But what are your thoughts on zero trust and some of these China-based engineers, even if they're being escorted working on DoD systems?
First, a good offense will always beat a good defense. Right? So if we aren't constantly evolving, like I have in my head a place where we are playing a continuous game of cat and mouse, best offense against best defense. So you can cycle faster than naturally occurs. And so maybe that, like in basketball, our defense can beat our adversaries to the spot. What is going on in the digital space is not a nice to have. It is the modern instantiation of national interests that are pervasive. And if they must, I mean, I described one imperative, which was outcompete us, but there's also information theft, destruction, placement of things, all sorts of things. They will continue to find a way in. So that's number one. Gosh, I wish peace would break out and that everyone was a good guy. Everyone thinks they're the good guys, but I can assure you that those who would do us harm. We just can't be complacent. There are really good things about the large companies in terms of how much reach they have, what they can do when they upgrade products, just lots of really good things about them. But I think there's also sometimes a false sense of security that nothing bad can happen because they'll catch everything that happens. So those are two. But here's the most important one. This is from your Aunt Sue, who used to do cyber operations. Most of the time, much of the time, digital attack is paired with a human to help it beat things like zero trust. So I'm all over zero trust. I think we've made it better. It's in the right direction. But missing the counterintelligence part that involves humans it's a classic blunder. Second only to don't fight a land war in Asia, Princess Bride illusion. We are still constantly surprised at the ways our adversaries and competitors are attacking us. And we come up with a solution as good as zero trust is, and we think that we've got it knocked, but you only have it knocked for that day until they must beat it and do something like this. So I'm really excited by what's happening in the commercial cyber counterintelligence field because the commercial field is at the volumes that you can look at nefarious activity rather than the more manual pieces that you have coming on. So I think it's a real problem. Interests will be advanced, and humans continue to be the best way into our systems, not just a technical approach.
This originated from the escort system is not new. There's been from foreign bases having people who did without a clearance come in to clean or do administrative things or even doing some work, but you always have a DoD representative with them to make sure that they aren't accessing physical, restricting them from physical access to things or even getting on a computer.
Yeah.
And the idea was to translate this over to the cloud. And you had these escorts that were, turns out, a little less trained, didn't necessarily know about the code, didn't know what they were working on, and opens up to additional risk. And the counter from the private sector would be, well, okay, if you wanted us to use all US
Yeah.
programmers or our US coders, the cost would have been exorbitant. Like you wouldn't be able to pay it. So there's a trade-off there. The transparency though, and the communication and the access, because when you're walking with a physical person and you're observing them doing work, much easier to identify that they're doing something nefarious or they trying to sneak away from you. But when you're in the cloud or in your digital space, you don't know what that person's doing. I guess there's a lot more opportunity for them to take advantage of that situation.
Yeah, the volumetric problem is massive, which is why, as excited I am about our new AI action plan, I worry when it outstrips the thoughtful application of security. It's intellectually a fine model of security escort, which, by the way, Eric, in 1980, when I made $13,000 a year, I also was a security escort at night, escorting people who didn't have security clearances into controlled spaces, and I would watch one.
Yeah,
So
one for one.
one for
Yeah.
one. So I do think this is a rich area for the use of artificial intelligence, which is why I hope we have as much incentive and action on using it to counter threats. And that requires, and we talked about this, I think, last time. Yes, we need to advance the use of AI without retarding it too much with overregulation, but security has to be one of the uses because of the volumetric issues surrounding the kinds of attacks that can be mounted. And even though this is humans, digital escorts, the signatures are going to be volumetrically much different and harder for a human to be able to see.
What's your reaction from Microsoft being the company involved? I mean, they're a global leader. They're the second $4 trillion company as of last week. What's the impact from their brand and their credibility on this topic?
I think they're almost too big to fail. I think you asked me a great question, and I can't remember whether I answered it well about what would I tell Jensen at NVIDIA, the NVIDIA CEO, and I would say the same thing to Satya Nadella, who is a really thoughtful leader at Microsoft, is you need to keep feeling the weight of responsibility, right? Just your distribution alone means that when you're not good enough, the potential for difficulty is much greater. So what I would say is I don't want to bash Microsoft because it's almost too easy and I don't think it's warranted. I will say, and there are advantages to using a product like Microsoft because when they find something, they can very quickly put a patch in or have a workaround or find a resolution. But we're going to have this problem over and over again. And the companies themselves have got to keep advancing in this area because nothing's happening to stop adversaries from advancing their interests, and we can't wait till something manifests or till the government prescribes it in order for it to be done. So I give the same advice. Feel the weight of responsibility. You're a $4 trillion company. They spend massive amounts on security and have advanced things, but it doesn't matter. You don't get to say, well, that's all I'm going to do. You have to do it till it's done.
Yeah, they're on the front lines, right? Even before the
Yeah.
government regulation
Yeah.
come in or the
Totally.
government could identify, it's the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act. They're the first ones to observe and orient, and then they can act on it before the government has a chance to then regulate. So lead from the front, guys.
Yep. Yep.
They've made significant investment in infrastructure. We've talked about data centers and some of the projects that they're doing there. But it's almost like if we're considering cybersecurity as an infrastructure and there's public funding going to some of that shared risk, they could invest in some of that infrastructure as well to help keep
Totally.
themselves and the national security interests, like you talked about.
And remember, I'm such a broken record on this, Eric. To an adversary or competitor, every node is target or transportation. And again, I know this, cyber attackers are fundamentally lazy. It might be really hard to get into a protected system. It might be easier to get in through an unprotected system. We have so many homegrown on-prem security solutions tended by under-resourced technical staffs that are part of our critical infrastructure, whether they know it or not, that I think we have to address. It's why the cloud is so attractive, even though the cloud isn't a panacea. It's just because having 1,000 one-offs, no, it's much bigger than that, tens of thousands of one-offs just creates too many opportunities for adversaries, competitors to get in. I alluded to this, but here's my big proposal. Help me, Mr. Historian. When did Ike do the U.S. interstate system?
So the transcontinental superhighway actually was started in the 30s by FDR. It was designed to be a Great Depression project. It's like I think New Deal and investment. And so 1938 was the Federal Aid Highway Act, designed to make a 6-route toll network, but it kind of petered out as World War II took off. The federal interstate highway system, as we know it today, was signed into law by Ike June 29th, 1956, which authorized $25 billion over 13 years for the construction of 41,000 miles of interstate. And it also created a highway trust fund. So kind of makes me think about your launch tax. Gasoline tax increasing from 2 cents to 3 cents per gallon. And then there's additional taxes on tires, trucks, and buses.
I knew I liked his proposal for a reason. It was started on my brother's second birthday and the year my sister was born. So, an auspicious year. I do like this is a very governmental problem. Remember, things that are really big, that require deep pockets and long time horizons. I would take some of my $4 trillion U.S. companies that have benefited from the security environment that is provided for them by the investment the American people make in national security, and I would say, you're going to participate with us, and we are going to use this as a technical infrastructure to connect all of the United States and her interests. We're going to use it as an education infrastructure to get rid of some of our health disparities and educational disparities. It can be an area for cybersecurity because we'll have a single approach in terms of how we do it. It can be an element of talent development when you choose to put your nodes of your digital highway system where you put it in terms of reaching out to some of our talented but underreached populations. And the companies are going to do well here as well because of the industries that are going to grow up around it. I think it's something that the time has come. And I have a hard time with President Trump's statements about how much money we're taking in via tariffs. But if we're actually took in $27 billion in July alone, let's put it against something good. You can pay for it like Ike did.
Yeah, and if you're deliberate about it from the outset, the interstate system ended up dividing a lot of communities and significant development on one side of the tracks versus the other, and you created some inadvertent disparities, and in some places deliberate disparities, right? There was some deliberate segregation with where some of the roads went. You could be a little bit more deliberate on that and really make this an infrastructure project that benefits and has far-reaching impact, second and third order effects of infrastructure investment in those areas that are maybe underserved or underutilized.
Make it your first huge bipartisan effort, right?
Let's do it.
This is an area where America has spoken very clearly about the issues they have with the disparities in society. No further definition. So let's make this be the one that is bipartisan to address the issues on all sides of that. I think it's something that the time has come. I think we could do it. I think the candidate that puts this together, puts this forward in a meaningful way with enough resources and plan behind it, not just an executive order that says we're going to do it and then calls it done. I think it's an idea that its time has come, and I think we could actually fund it within the fiscal constraints that we have currently. So let's do it, Eric.
Start working some legislation after this.
All right? In our spare time.
Yeah. All right, we'll
It's
continue on.
it's my platform for my candidacy for presidency. Just let me get rid of a couple other issues in my life.
Few other things you got
Yeah,
going on.
yeah, exactly.
All right. We'll move on to this idea of dismantling the government. So, into last week, President Trump dismissed the Bureau of Labor Statistics Commissioner, Dr. Erica McIntyre, after a weak July jobs report and ordered rescission of Jen Easterly's academic appointment to West Point, where she was to be the Robert F. McDermott Distinguished Chair in the Department of Social Sciences, which is not a full-time teaching position, and any costs incurred will not be paid by West Point. Easterly, if you don't know, is the former director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, CISA, and a 1990 United States Military Academy graduate. She's seemingly solid. I've never met her personally, done a lot of work in cybersecurity, but critics warn that this will erode institutional integrity and longstanding partisan civil service norms. In the case of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, she was confirmed as BLS commissioner in January 2024, with a bipartisan 86 to 8 Senate vote. It wasn't a voice vote like yours, Sue, typically used when the matter is non-controversial or expected to pass easily. And there's usually bipartisan support. And I'm
100%,
guessing
baby.
that some of the senators wanted a recorded vote for the record. But 86 to 8, not too bad. Among the Republican senators who voted to confirm her include then Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio and then Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. We know those guys. These personnel decisions risk lasting harm to agency credibility. They demoralize career professionals, and they cast doubt on the signals government sends to markets. So, especially amid tariff-induced pressure that fuels cost-cutting via layoffs rather than sustainable reforms. Sue, what are your thoughts on these two firings or revokings?
Well, so the whole trend of firing career civil servants who became political appointees because the area they were working in was one of expertise, not just of policy, is so massively wrongheaded. And these are just the two latest ones. I'll throw Chris Krebs, Jen's predecessor at CISA, who is under attack. And, then we can go to the military with the number of generals and admirals who have been let go for some non-specific reason. I'm going to give you this tagline. We cannot continue to throw away half our talent with each election. There is an expertise to some of the disciplines we have. I'm in favor of political appointees that carry any new president's policies to say these are the policies that the American people have said they wanted. But they have to be affected by people who actually know the craft. I've said this before. The reason why we don't have 90 deals in 90 days is there's just no one to do them.
Yep, it's physics.
Right? It's just there's no one to do it. And the president, let's say he's the most amazing, talented person in the world, he's going to be able to do 1,000th of 1% of the number of decisions that need to be made in order for the nation and given our place in the world to act reasonably. So it's just wrongheaded. It is antithetical even to the president's stated objectives, which makes me wonder whether he really has those objectives, and that's to actually do something. We mentioned DOGE earlier. Bring some people in that know how to look at a budget with the mandate to make it smaller and identify those things that are no longer valid in this environment. Man, now you're getting somewhere. So it is wrongheaded. And again, it is not exclusive. It is extreme with this administration, but it's not exclusive. The Biden administration wouldn't touch a Trump appointee, right? I want expertise. And again, American people, come on. Listen, as my daughter would say, develop some ridges in your brain. The likelihood that an individual who has spent her career doing what she believed was important would purposely harm the United States in order to get back at this version of a president, it just makes no sense. So are there methodological things you might question about how the Bureau of Labor and Statistics works? Maybe. But the likelihood that this is happening, and when you get rid of all the expertise, the erosion in trust globally will come back to haunt us in massive ways. And don't be messing with our financial systems. I just think this is super problematic, but it isn't the only case.
Yeah, so some of the drama that surrounds the numbers, the change in total non-farm payroll employment for May was revised down. So they put out these numbers every month, but then they go back the past couple months because there's been delays in reporting from companies and things like that. And the estimates were lower. That's what really irked the president. At least that's the truth he put out, or reduced by 125,000 from 144,000 to 19,000. And the change from June was revised down from 147,000 down to 14,000. So those are pretty significant drops. Unemployment, which is a different measurement, rose for the first time since March to 4.2%. And so break this down a little bit. Non-farm payroll, that's how many jobs employers are adding or cutting in the given month. The unemployment rate is how many people who want jobs can't find one. So they could be correlated, but maybe not. And they're definitely not causal. So they're two separate surveys. Think businesses versus households, businesses hiring, households looking for work. And they measure different things: job creation by businesses or job seekers out there in the market. They often move together, but they don't have to. And I think this is overall indicative of the Q2 earnings and all this uncertainty from tariffs. The fastest way to cut operational costs in a company is to fire people or reduce hiring. We haven't seen necessarily all these impacts on tariffs influencing the prices just yet, but the first hit came in the Q2 reportings from a lot of these companies in terms of their share price. General Motors, for example, disclosed a net $1.1 billion in tariff impact. Ford is expecting at the end of the year about $3 billion headwind. Harley Davidson reported a $13 million cost in Q2 directly related tariffs. And there's a number of technology companies, including Celastica, which stated, quote, substantially all tariffs paid by Celastica are expected to be recovered from our customers. So we haven't seen it roll forward just yet, but it will be coming. I don't know if Dr. McIntarfer was good at her job or not, but I think we can assume she was, being a career professional. The point I want to make, though, is that data can be framed and used in a different way. So that 4.2% unemployment number I used earlier, Sue, that ties the highest percentage since October 2021. So 4.2%. Should the sky be falling? Do we need to worry about the economy? Are things a disaster? Or I could also tell you that's the mode from that same period, or the value that appears most frequently in that data set from October of 2021 till now, 4.2%. 7 other months saw that same high value. The average was 3.85%, so it's on the higher side over the period, but the range was only 3.4% to 4.2%. And I say all that to say that framing of this data is not new. You can take the statistics and you can cry from the rooftops that it's a disaster because we're 4.2%, or you can say, hey, we're on the high side, but we're roughly where we've been over the past couple years. The sky is not falling. In that case, everyone's playing with the same trusted tools. They're using the same numbers and they're just spinning them differently, but there's no cause for concern within the number itself. The information and the data is credible. And outside of the government, businesses write long-term contracts tied to this inflation data. The Federal Reserve uses it to make their decisions on interest rates. And Social Security benefits are adjusted based on the Consumer Price Index, which is another thing that comes out of the BLS. So the biggest concern here I have is that it undermines that shared trust that you're talking about. And even the perception of this politicized numbers has huge ramifications and impacts, not just domestically, but in the international markets.
Well, so just one, so agree with the point about numbers can be used to prove any point, right? They can, it's as old as time, but you still have to have the same numbers, right? So there is a check and balance to it too. Eric, you and I both work for the government. We are not naive about areas where the government needs to improve. I believe in data and data explainability and data understanding and data analytics. We are still way too manual, and we have invested way too little in the kinds of systems that will help us have better dashboards in order to do it. This is not a blanket endorsement of the numbers themselves. But here's where I have a problem. President Trump, when he said it, he said, I've had a problem with her since the election when she produced really, really beneficial numbers right before the election, revised upwards to benefit Kamala Harris, right? That's what he cited. Do you know that on the day of the Democratic convention, with the number that he cites as evidence of a revision then, the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually decreased that jobs report in March downward by 818,000 on the day that would do her the most harm as she walked into her convention.
818. We were only talking about 144
I
here
know,
as the
I
base.
know.
Dang.
Right? Dang. Right? So the problem is deal with the numbers, deal with the methodology, make it better, make it more responsive, make government better. Government isn't good enough. But eroding the trust in the intentionality of the institutions and the humans is way more destructive than 5 different perspectives on the same number.
Yeah. I think it's also important to remember that we're talking about numbers here, but every one of those 144,000 people
Is a
is a
human.
job and a family and somebody trying to make it. Every one of those 4.2% of people is trying to make a living. And if you've ever filed for unemployment or not sure where your next job or paycheck's come from, you know full well what that feels like and how much that uncertainty is. And I'm not trying to minimize that by any
Not at
means,
all.
but saying that the numbers need to be true to themselves and you need to have confidence in the numbers in order to make additional decisions.
And it's not about whether we feel good about ourselves or not good about ourselves. It's whether we have the data we need in order to make decisions that are better for the American people. I'm really glad you brought up the human cost. I remember just during a continuing resolution, we had a government shutdown. Actually, those two things are antithetical. That was weird. Um,
Because of the lack of a continuing
yeah, because of
resolution?
lack of a CR, we had a government shutdown for, oh man, I think it was like 2.5 weeks. I was senior. I mean, I made a good living. Being without a paycheck for one pay period, I felt it. So did 70% of the people that work. This is not small stuff. And again, I think this is what the American people agree is something that we need to do better. Now we just get to agree on real solutions that will get at it.
Moving to our predictions for next week. So last week, the Commanders are still the Commanders.
Okay,
Only we've talked about Rosie O'Donnell.
how long are you gonna milk that?
Just for 1 week. Just 1 week. I'll have a national security prediction here. What did you have last week? You remind me?
I think I'm gonna do the same thing I just accused you of doing. Still, former President Obama is still roaming free. No, just stop it, y'all. It's never going to happen. America, let's move on to something else. But yeah, so I think that was my prediction. That's still no. I do have a new prediction though.
Yeah, what are you watching?
I think for America, in light of the Ukraine-Russia conversation I think August 8th is the deadline that President Trump put forward if Russia hasn't made meaningful progress towards some sort of um, seriousness of purpose when it comes to negotiating with Ukraine. He would impose massive sanctions. I think that's a date worth watching. So what's my prediction? No, he won't. He won't do anything on that day.
You don't think we'll have additional sanctions on? It's primarily secondary it's sanctions, right? On folks who are selling stuff too. So like we put additional sanctions on India for buying their oil.
Yep. Yep. I think my first is that's an event to watch because it will say if we're trending in the right direction or whether my fears will come true that we always back off when Putin pushes us. But if he does continue the press, I think that's a super good thing. So watch this channel.
Yeah, I think that's my prediction is that we'll see movement in Ukraine before we see significant movement in Israel, Gaza. The 8th is the end of this week. So I think Trump's frustrated that he's finally starting to realize he's being played by Putin. He's finally starting to get frustrated by that. And a new international development also starts to pull back a little bit of the Epstein headlines.
Yeah. So I just say, having served as his principal deputy, he is very different in this administration than he was in the first. But there are areas where he isn't the caricature that he's being portrayed. And I will say that he really, despite the cruelty of some of his policies and some of his statements that we see, and it's almost cognitive dissonance for me, he really does hate human suffering. I don't think he is being disingenuous when the human toll of all these crises he finds abhorrent. Now, whether he has the wherewithal or the intention to effect it, he is getting frustrated. I think he's getting frustrated with Bibi. The problem is these are very knotty, Knotty issues when it comes to other interests he has in terms of shared power structure. Listeners are going to say, no way. And I will say no person that can be as cruel as I've seen his policies be could possibly be this way. But I do think it is an area that really does motivate him to want to act. Whether it motivates him to act in a way that costs him anything in power, I think too early to tell.
You're saying there's a chance.
I always believe there's a pony. It's why you love me.
That's what we're watching. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
Thank you for joining us. As always, remember, we're here for you. Look for a link to the show notes to provide feedback or suggest topics for the next time. I'm told that feedback is a gift, and Eric and I both believe it because we give each other feedback a lot. Join us next week for the Understandable Insights podcast, wherever you listen. And as always, go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another.